Hello, Lauren. Welcome to Creative Momentum with Meg. Can you start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what your creative work is?
Sure, thanks for having me. So, my name's Lauren Novak, and I suppose I'm speaking to you because my latest creative pursuit is releasing my debut book, which is nonfiction. But I think probably what people might call narrative journalism. So there was a little bit of creativity, but not to the extent of fiction. And then for my day job, I am a journalist at the newspaper in Adelaide here.
Nice, nice. Um, do you also write fiction or not yet?
No, so this is interesting. I used to really love that when I was a kid. So I am that person that you do hear on the podcast who from when I was 8 years old, I wanted to be specifically an author illustrator. Um,
Ooh.
that combo. Turns out I'm not so great at drawing, at least not to a professional standard. So that's kind of slipped away. But yeah, always wanted for that to be my job and was that kid that was writing fiction stories all through school, with my friends. And then we, perform them as plays and all that really cringy stuff that you think about when you're a small child. Um, and then got this impression that, I needed to get a day job that was going to pay the bills in the meantime. And so I got into journalism because I'm actually really interested in the real world and how it works and learning things I didn't know and then telling other people things they didn't know. And that's been a fabulous career. I love it. But I think it's probably sort of, taken that creativity in the really sort of fictional imaginary sense out of me. And so I'm trying to work to get that back now.
That's very interesting. Um, can you tell me, like, do you have a routine for did you have a routine for writing this nonfiction book? And
Yes.
do you still have a routine for your writing?
Yeah, I did definitely have a routine. So the book is called Meltdown, and it's about my experience with mum rage, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with. Um,
Oh, yeah. I feel like
and
every mum that's listening is just shaking, nodding their
yeah,
head, going, yeah, yeah, gotcha.
well, and this is why I had to write the book because it wasn't something that I had certainly ever read about, let alone really been spoken about sort of properly, while I was having children. And so my kids are 6 and 4 now, and I wrote the book when they were about 4 and 2. Um, and I went looking for a book on that topic when I thought, oh, is it just me? Do I need to sort myself out? And realized that there wasn't really much out there. But then everyone I started talking to about said, oh, yes, me too, as soon as you raised it. So I was like, okay, I think I probably have to put my journalism skills, like my professional skills to this very personal problem. And that's kind of where that book came from. But as far as the routine, I had to have a routine because having a 4 and a 2-year-old, I couldn't just write in the cracks. I know a lot of people talk about that as sort of 20 minutes here, 10 minutes there, but I just found that quite frustrating because I'd just get into it and then I'd be interrupted by, I need a snack or a nappy change or that sort of thing. Or you'd think they'd gone down for a nap and then they'd wake up earlier than expected. And I found that was just adding to my mum rage. So
I was going to say that'd be adding to the rage, adding content, really.
exactly. So for me, I kind of just had to find a way to really block out some time and make that a priority, probably at the expense of other things at that point in my life. But I was very, very lucky to have the support of grandparents, so my parents and also my partner's parents, who would like pick the kids up from childcare or and just have them for a few hours so that I'd get a bit longer. And we sort of worked it out that it was one day a week I could block out after drop off the most of that day for writing so that I could get deep into whatever I was doing.
Mm.
And then I could do other things in the cracks. So I could listen to a podcast that was about the topic I was thinking of, or I could read, some research on the couch after they went to bed at night. I could sort of do those things in pockets, but the thinking and the writing, I really needed time.
Mm. Did you kind of lean on the routines that you had as a journalist already?
Yes, it's interesting that you say that because like one of the first things that you think about once you realize you're going to write a book is, oh, how am I going to get to 70, 80,000 words when the most I'd ever had published was sort of 4.5. But when I thought about that, I thought, well, if each chapter is kind of like a 4,500 word or 3,000 word, whatever magazine piece, then I can do that, and I can string them together. And so that is kind of how I approached it. Each chapter had a particular focus of either something that triggered anger in motherhood or explaining something about it. And then it was interesting when I got the structural feedback. One of the key things was that I wasn't linking those chapters enough. So, and in fiction, that's essential. Like you've got to keep people, you've got to drag them through to the next chapter. And I can see that as a reader. But I found that fascinating that I'm so trained to sort of finish things nicely, at the end of a magazine article, because they don't have to then go to the next page for that story. And so that was something I had to sort of fix in the second round.
That is quite interesting. The whole mum rage thing is such, I don't know. I'm so glad that you've written this, because I know when I had my kids, which was like 100 years ago, there wasn't, no one was really talking about it. And I ended up asking I think it was the maternal health nurse, like if there was any course I could do to manage my own rage. But yeah, it was a taboo topic.
Yeah. Well, good on you for raising it, because I think that was part of the issue. Was I felt like it was a personality thing initially, and like it wasn't something I could ask a medical professional for help for. And it turns out that's entirely wrong. Um, but it was one of those things where there wasn't really anything in book form. There are podcasts definitely now, they're excellent, and there's a lot more social media and that sort of thing. But there's something about kind of having all of that together in one place, and particularly, I know mums don't have a lot of time to read a physical book. I'm very aware of that, but there's something about having something you can come back and reference to. And I sort of tried to structure it in a way that, because it doesn't have a beginning to end narrative, you can jump in and out of a chapter. You can say, oh, my issue's sleep at the moment, and you can jump to the sleep chapter. But again, that's probably also a symptom of the way that I was writing it in those kind of like discrete magazine type pieces. But you asked if I lean on those journalistic tendencies, and definitely for this to be my debut, it felt much easier to be doing that kind of writing. I'm very familiar with. I knew what word counts I could hit, easily in whatever hours. I'm very familiar with interviewing people and turning those stories into something that hopefully is entertaining to read. What I'm confronting now is that I'd love to do fiction, but that's a whole other kettle of fish.
Mm. So do you have a routine now, or are you in the I don't know, that liminal space?
That's a nicer way of describing it than I was thinking of. I think, to be honest, I'm sort of in the slightly beating myself up phase at the moment of like, I should be looking at a
Oh,
book too.
such a dirty word, should.
I know, isn't it? Yeah, so I'm in the thinking phase. I have ideas. I think probably my biggest issue is commitment. There are some people who say that like coming up with the idea is the issue. And then once they do, they're off. I'm sort of the other way around. I almost have too many ideas and I'm not sure which one to commit to. And then because we're all so busy and time is limited, it sort of becomes a question of, is this idea worth committing to? And that probably is keeping me in a bit of a state of like paralysis.
Yeah, I wonder if it might be helpful to just kind of time box that decision and go, all right, I need to decide in the next minute, and I'm going to decide, where the heat is.
Yes, I have heard that phrase. Yes, and that was the thing about Meltdown, the mum rage. The heat was there. Like I couldn't not do that. And it's interesting because maybe I just haven't felt that yet about about that. But the thinking is still there, and the sort of spotting ideas that might inspire me. That's kind of where it's at the moment.
Mhm. Do you have a process? Well, obviously, you must have a process with your journal, with your magazine pieces. Can you tell me a bit about what your process was with writing Meltdown, and uh, you go from the idea of mum rage, and now it's a book.
Mm.
How did you get to that?
Yeah, yeah. How did I get to that? Um, yeah, I think that that's also something that I had to think about was is it a mag feature or is it a book? Like, is there enough in it to be a book? And thinking about what would be of value to a reader that would sort of compel them to go out and buy this thing and invest the time to read it. So the subtitle of the book is Why Motherhood Makes Us Angry and What to Do About It. And I think the what to do about it, is the driver of that. So basically, I approached it as my own little sort of research project. I went, well, I've got mum rage. What's causing it? Um, what experts can I talk to who will tell me more about that? And just talking to other mums, that was my main focus to start with. So I put out a survey, and about 200 mums from all over the world answered, and I fondly refer to them as my Angry Mums Club now. That survey is still open, and all are welcome at my website. So I needed material to work with. So by the time I got that survey, and then I interviewed specific mums who had specific issues to talk to, and then I interviewed experts, so neuroscientists. I wanted to know why sleep was such a big thing. Dietitians, why do I get angry when I get hungry? But then also, some eminent experts in like the social structures, so people who really understand our childcare systems and our paid parental leave systems, and where are the sticking points in there. And I think that's really where it's almost hard for me to explain the routine, because that's so second nature as a journo, that I applied all of that skill. And then it was about bringing that into a story that was not just a news report. And that's where I say like narrative journalism. So I do hope that it is entertaining, even though it's true. It's written in a way that I don't know, maybe if you picked it up and you didn't know, you might be reading about a character as opposed to me.
Mm, mm. Um, so when did you make, and how did you make that decision to go from this could just be a magazine piece to no, this is bigger?
Mm. Yeah, I'm not really sure. I think probably it was because I'd always had, I think every journo thinks we've got a book in us, right? So at some point, maybe I just realized that was it. You just reminded me actually, though, that there was a book that I had read at the time, which was on a totally different topic, but it had the structure. And now that I think about it, that was probably a bit of a light bulb moment where I went, if I were to write something on this topic, that's how I would do it. So the book was called Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. It had a really big moment a few years ago because it was all about how none of us can pay attention to anything anymore. It's an excellent book. So it wasn't at all to do with the topic I was looking about. The way he structured it, he started with sort of a personal story and his connection to this issue. And then he took it through the reasons why we can't focus and what the experts say about it, what we as individuals can do, what we as society can do. And it sort of that fell into place for me as being really applicable to the issue of anger in motherhood in the same way.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
but then obviously I had to ask if that would be a book. And so, as you know, like pitching, having an idea of pitching successfully are two different things. Um, and I'm lucky that with nonfiction, I don't have to write the whole thing and then pitch it, right? So I could pitch a sample chapter and then a proposal of what are the other things I would look at and how would I bring it together.
mm. And that's when it was picked up, when you
So
pitched.
that's how I pitched HarperCollins. Yes, yeah. And so my sample chapter was about 5,000 words, and if you look at the first two chapters of the book, it's basically that in a slightly more condensed. But that's where I started, and then I said, well, this would be the style that I would approach it in, and here's what else I would tackle, and here's how I'd kind of bring it all together at the end. Um, and then once they said sure, then I had to do that.
Had to deliver.
Yep.
I find this quite fascinating because I'm not a nonfiction writer as such, other than just Substack, etc. Um, but I have been working with some writers who are writing in this space, and uh, almost like episodic. essays around this. So when you had that 5,000 words and the rest of it mapped out, did you know that that was it? That was solid? How did you go through that process of working out what to include and what not to?
Yeah, I think there was a research phase. So there was then a period where I actually did basically no writing and was just collecting, and then the women's stories particularly were what then started to inspire, retelling their experience and then that leading into a particular issue. The way that the book ends, so to speak, I didn't know how I was going to finish it, but it turns out there is a little bit of a narrative in the sense that it sort of follows my initial reaction to this anger in motherhood and then my journey to fix it and then where am I now. Like I had this question in my proposal of am I still angry, that was kind of the last chapter. And so, I mean, the answer is yes. But I know so much more about it and I feel so differently about it now and I view things differently and I have so much more knowledge. So that's kind of how that story comes full circle. So in a way that I tried to have a little bit of a through line, if you like, but also you can dip in and out of it because it is that sort of each chapter is like a particular topic.
And did you do each chapter and bring that to a polished stage? Or did you just go, I'm going to write it all out and then I'm going to ripple through and do the whole lot as the next draft?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm thinking back on that now. I think the way that I write generally, and I think this is from journalism training, is like, yeah, you kind of have to start at the beginning because most of the time you're telling people something that's happened, and that's the top of the yarn. And so for each chapter, it really was kind of once I had my opening anecdote or once I had like where I wanted to start with it, and I would go back and change that. But that's how I approach most of my writing is to try and drop myself and the reader right into it
Mm.
and go from there. And then that can change. But so like one of the chapters opens with me like stuffing my face with this muffin that I've microwaved in the middle of the night because I'm breastfeeding and I'm starving and I'm hungry. And, quite often it would be that I would sit down and think, okay, this chapter's about hunger. Let me think about a story, whether it's from me or a mum I'd interviewed or something, and then sort of be in that. And that's probably the most creative part of it because that's almost like it is remembering something that happened, but it's also a little bit like writing a story about a character. And then from there, I'd start to hang the facts and the experts off of it, and then try to bring it to some sort of helpful conclusion.
Yeah, oh, you're making me want to read this so much. And I also think that actually, Mother Age goes through all of it changes, I think, over the years. Um, do you think yours is more based on when your children are little or just forever?
Yeah, I certainly made an effort to speak to parents of kids of all ages because I think for me, what I realized was like there's factors when they're little, but then those factors are just going to change as they're older. Like teenagers being rude to you, I'm sure is as aggravating as a toddler that won't put on their shoes, And if
Mm.
you're dealing with postpartum hormones or you're dealing with perimenopausal hormones, so I wanted to try and reflect a lot of that.
Mm.
Uh, It'd be interesting now that I think about it because if I am able to write book two, it will be in quite different personal circumstances. Like I'm getting almost double the amount of sleep now that I was getting when I wrote this book.
Mm.
Um, and it is easier just in even talking about this book and spending the time to do that. It's a bit easier to carve that time out for myself. But there is still that, cost benefit analysis of if I spend time writing is it quote unquote worth it
Mm.
because I'm taking myself away from family or from sleep or from something. And I think that might be a bit of a hangover from having written as a journalist most of my career, where, as long as you're doing your job, you're pretty guaranteed to get published. Like, that because your editor has said, yes, I want that story. If they say no, well, you go and look for something else. You don't bother. And so yeah, there's something in that psyche that I'm going to have to sort of get around where there's not going to be a guarantee that I get published, and I'm going to have to figure out why that's worth doing anyway.
Which is so interesting, especially if you're going to write in fiction, because
Yes, yeah, yeah.
um, tell me, Lauren, what what catches your eye? What's your inspiration for writing, whether it's writing for magazines, writing this, well, we've heard about what inspired you for this book.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also like what's inspiring you for writing now as well.
Mm. People are so fascinating.
Mm.
And so for example, I've just finished a magazine feature on one of the other authors that's in the 2026 debut crew for Australia. So she's got a memoir coming out. It's called Solo Mum by Choice, Lorena Oates. And, her experience is so different from mine. So I found that fascinating. And when I heard about her book, I thought, oh, I want to interview you for that. And so she's written a whole book about it. I've interviewed her for, say, an hour and then sort of retold a condensed version of that. And I find that an interesting art form. That's one way of doing it. Um, but then as far as fiction, uh, you know, news can be really weird. And so quite often, and I've heard other fiction authors talk about this, they'll see like a tiny little snippet in the bottom of the paper about like someone found a foot in a bin in, Chicago or whatever. And that's where their next novel comes from. And I find stuff like that all the time. I've got a, notes app that's full of it. And I think that's my problem is I don't know which one to commit to, but that's certainly where the inspiration comes from.
I love that because that's also me. Like I love, the weird things that you hear in the news or you see in the paper. Less, don't read the paper as a physical paper as much. But, I've got a little case of clippings and little just odd things I've seen. Because yeah,
Yeah.
people are weird
Yeah.
and fascinating.
Yeah. And it can be a link to a news article or something you see on social media. It's just, yeah, that's the start of something. It makes you think, oh, I wonder where that could go. And I think what I know actually is that, even when I do fiction, I'm going to have to be a plotter because I'm going to have to know that it's going somewhere to sort of keep persisting with it.
I have heard that from other journalists as well, that they have to plot because it's just it's embedded in the way you work.
Yeah, and that could change. Like I understand that sort of you plot and then you pants, but yeah, I would have to know. Okay, so they found the foot in the bin. Whose foot is it? Like I'd have to know to then write that story.
Yeah, yeah. If you were to be chatting with someone who maybe was at the beginning of their creative work or, thinking about doing some journalism or writing a nonfiction or is wanting to kind of move into that, what wisdom, advice would you want to share with them?
Mm. I think something that a lot of people think when they go into either journalism or a sort of related field is if they really liked English at school and they're really, good, quote unquote, at English, that's the key. But it's not. The key is curiosity. So the hardest part as a journal is finding the yarn. You can get help with the writing. And obviously, nice writing is excellent and copy editors appreciate clean copy. um, but, you can learn and practice those things. But I think curiosity is the key thing. And whether that is, as we've been talking about, being curious about people and then it's something you hear and turning that into a story, or specifically for journalism, I mean, you have to want to know stuff. You have to want to ask questions to do the job. I think that's the key element.
Mm. What feels like home for you and your creative work?
Mm. I love newsrooms. And I think if I was going to do, another type of writing, I'd also almost have to consider going to one of those like hub working places because I can do it at home and it's good to get in the zone on your own and not have distractions. But I've just been in a newsroom for so much of my adult life, let alone my career, that I just love being around other people when you can hear that they've just got onto a good yarn or they've just published something, or you can hear the conference table and they're thinking about what the headline's going to be for the next day. um, there are very few elections, either state or federal, that I've not been in a newsroom for at some point. I love that buzz. And then everyone standing around afterwards at midnight eating cold pizza, kind of hashing over what's happened. So that, when you use that phrase, feels like home, that does, in the creative sense, that does feel like home.
Mm. Oh, I love that. Needing
Yeah.
that buzz around you.
Yeah. And
Uh,
you're around other people who all feed on that too, and it's the same, like if we're able to get together with a bunch of other authors, it's that same thing. Everybody, you're speaking the same language, you're excited about the same things.
yeah. I think that actually makes me think of, put a bunch of writers together. We're very quiet by ourselves, but put a bunch of writers together, it's incredibly loud.
Yeah, yeah. That's probably the one like writing stereotype that I really don't identify with is that like quiet writer in their cave who doesn't want to deal with other people. Like that's definitely not me. And I get that, but I think my writing is so much about the world and interacting that um I get the uninterrupted time and the wanting to be in a quiet space, and I do need that sometimes. But yeah, I have just as much fun like interacting with other people about it.
Yeah, so do I. Um, do
That's
you
why you
have
have a podcast about it.
a, because I'm so curious about
It's
how people do
brilliant.
their things. Do you have a studio or a writing room? Or do you write wherever you can?
So I wrote Meltdown in our previous home, which was a open plan. Like we didn't have an office that you could shut the door on, so I had to be home alone basically to write on that day. I'm now we moved house and I'm sitting in an office where you can shut the door. But funnily enough, connected to what I was just saying, often find that I pick the computer up and take it out into the kitchen anyway, just to be, I don't know, in the sort of hub of the home. Not necessarily if there's lots of noise. But maybe that's a bit of a Stockholm syndrome thing from the newsroom or something. I feel like I have to be writing around other people or noise, maybe.
Yes. Oh, that's what Stephen King found as well. When he got his big room and his big desk, and then he just took his computer, he had to go and sit with the in the hub where
Yeah, and I mean the risk with doing that with kids of a certain age is that they will interact with you. So I want to kind of be around, but I don't want to be interrupted. So it's a fine line.
just
And
like
probably there's
mummy's in her bubble. Do not
yeah,
interrupt.
which you have to shut the door if they're under a certain age. The bubble has to be physical. But yeah, but I definitely have those other things. Like there was a album that I listened to kind of just on repeat while I was writing Meltdown. That in the end, I sort of didn't even hear it anymore, and it was probably a bit of that Pavlovian response that I would turn it on and it would feel like this is writing time. And it was quite mellow music. It did have lyrics. I found instrumental was actually more distracting for me for some reason, whereas that blended into the background.
Maybe that's the newsroom.
Yeah, maybe. And as long as there's that and coffee, then I'm good.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast and chatting about your creative work. I'm sure that there are going to be many people who are trying to cobble together a bigger nonfiction piece. So I'm sure they are going to appreciate your wisdom and the conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
My absolute pleasure. And there'll be links to your book and, well, the form, the survey.
Yes, the Mum Rage survey. Come join my Angry Mums Club.
Yeah. Are you thinking that there might be a sequel to this in some way?
Well, there's a little sneaky thing there. If you go to look for the Mum Rage survey, you will see that I've put another one up there about a different topic, and that is dipping my toe into the first question of whether this might be an idea for book two. So I'd also be keen if people would click on the other survey.
Oh, excellent. I love that. Also, the secrecy
Yeah,
of it. Yeah. I'll be probably the first one to click on that. Um,
amazing.